This is a lot easier said than done. I've certainly struggled with aspects of this in the past, but over time I feel like I've gotten a lot better at it. And what we're talking about is saving money during a thru hike. You've quit your job, you have money in the bank, but now you must live off of that money for the next 3 to 6 months of travel. A lot of people say that you should have about $1,000 for every month that you plan on being out there, with a little bit more to come home to as well. Now, one thing about this is that you can do it for a lot less than that. A cheap thru hike would be about in the range of $1 a mile. So for the 2,200 mile Appalachian Trail, that would cost you about $2,000 for a really cheap thru hike. This is opposed to others spending roughly $6,000 to $7,000 for a trail like the AT. So that would be about a $5,000 difference or savings in the end. And some people even manage to spend less than that over the course of a thru hike. So how can you thru hike for less? And probably the biggest thing that you can do is go faster. If you do a trail in 3 months that takes everyone else 6 months, then you should spend about half the money. This has worked great for me in the past, and personally has been the easiest one for me to maintain. Just do more miles every day. I personally spent the same amount of money hiking 5,000 miles that a lot of people spend only hiking 2,000 miles. And that's mostly because I went twice as fast. Avoid towns when you can. If you don't explicitly need to go into one, then don't. Some hikers will try and convince you that this town is amazing or that this hostel is just the coolest thing ever, but trust me, they're all pretty similar and you're really not missing much, if anything at all. Towns can be a huge sink for both money and time, so you always need to remember your goal of spending less money and spending more time on the trail. One trick to avoiding towns is to just carry a little bit more food. On the Appalachian Trail, I personally, on average, carried about 5 to 6 days worth of food, even though I could have been going into a town just about every single day if I wanted to. But you know, every single time you go into town, you're gonna stop at a restaurant, you're gonna stop at maybe a hostel or a hotel. So if you leave that last town carrying extra food, then you're that much less likely to go into the next one and spend that much more money. Now, while in town, if you must get a motel or a hotel and there aren't any obvious trail angel situations around or hostels, then be sure to share the room. Share it with at least one other person, 2, 3, or 4 if possible, without aggravating the management of the establishment. And you're essentially cutting your expenses in half, in a quarter, in thirds, whatever. I will go another step further with this and just say don't get a hotel, don't get a hostel, don't do any of that stuff. Because you really don't need it most of the time unless you're recovering from an injury or trying to recover. On the Eastern Continental Trail from Virginia all the way down to Key West, 2,400 miles, I only stayed at 2 hostels, hotels, motels, whatever. Only 2 in 2,400 miles. Instead, choosing to save my money and spend my time on the trail instead of in some bed watching television, which is something I can do when I get home anyway. Now, if you do have to go into town, try and get in and out in the same day. There's something known as a zero, where you spend a full day doing 0 miles, or essentially staying 2 days in town. There's a Nero, where you go into town, you sleep into town, and then you leave the day after. And then there's a Hero, where you go into town and you leave that same day. So plan out for the next coming days, try and get into town in the morning so you can do all of your chores and then leave that same day. Because honestly, once you've done all of your chores, your laundry, your showering, or eating at restaurants and resupply, then you don't really need to be in town any longer. Also, I just found the campsite at this place. I haven't really noticed it before, and it's really pretty. All these beautiful oak trees, hanging Spanish moss, it's right on the water, so that's exciting. I'll have to come back here again soon. So on the Appalachian Trail, I had a friend that wore the same shoes for 1,600 miles, which is quite a bit extreme, but I think it goes well with this next one. Make your gear last. You know, you start with a certain gear list and certain things. Don't replace them so soon, and when they start breaking and dying and ripping, getting holes, and start repairing them. You know, when you get into town, find a little sewing kit or some duct tape or just anything you can do to repair the gear and make it last a little bit longer. You know, $200 could almost be the difference of another couple of weeks worth of hiking. Buy the cheapest brands. Buy everything that essentially has that store's name on it. Whether it's Walmart or Publix or whatever grocery store you're going to. Those things may not seem a lot cheaper, but in the long run, when you're buying 100 days or 200 days worth of food and all these different little bars and chips and things, it really adds up, and in the end you will wind up saving a lot of money doing so. Now, instead of spending money in towns and buying from the local grocery stores, you can also send yourself boxes. Pre-packaged boxes that are at home, that are sent to you over the course of the months from a family member or a friend. I personally do this, and I love doing this, and it is a controversial way to save money on a thru hike because the boxes themselves cost money, but here's why they're wrong. With boxes, sure, you can shop sales locally and buy the cheapest foods possible already and send those to yourself along the way, but here's the real trick to them. Before I've even left for my trip, I've spent all the money I need on the food I'm going to want when I'm on trail. So then when I am on trail, I'm not going into that town and spending that money on things I don't need, because when you go into town, you wind up walking out with a lot of stuff that you didn't necessarily need or truly want. It's just that the trail hunger got to you. So when you plan all this stuff out in advance and you have these boxes with a certain amount of calories planned for each day, then you already know you pick up that box and you're good to go. And you don't need a space where you can sort out some giant resupply you just bought at a grocery store, which tends to be a hostel or a hotel. So when I buy boxes, I know I have everything I need and I'm in and out of the town very fast. And before I've even left, I've already essentially budgeted and spent that food money. This reason people often go into towns is because they want to clean themselves, and rightfully so. The trail can be a very dirty place. But then there are a lot of people that kind of feel like the dirt and the grime and the disgustingness is just the way of the trail. And it really isn't. Like, it's such a bad thing. And if you are really dirty out there, you can get sick from that. The people around you can get sick from that, and it can get really bad. I've actually seen someone who had an infected sweat gland where it swelled and they had to get it surgically dealt with. So keep clean while you're on trail. When you come across that spring or that river or whatever you can kind of keep clean in, wash yourself. You know, so when you get in town, for that reason alone, you won't feel the need to get a hotel because you're already pretty darn clean. Now, when you're in town, try and avoid drinking, and especially avoid buying cigarettes or smoke or anything along those lines, because truly that is not a necessity. It is very, very unnecessary and can be a huge sink for cash. Just think about, there are a lot more people that have to quit thru hikes because of finances than you would think. And how bad would it suck if you had to quit because you ran out of money even when you are still very physically able to keep going. So if your goal is to not spend a lot of money, then avoiding drinking and smoking is a huge one. Now, also when you're in town, be sure to check out hiker boxes. They're usually at post offices or hostels or just places that hikers congregate and gather. Hiker boxes are essentially just a cardboard box of things that other hikers didn't want. Now, unfortunately, since they didn't want it, you yourself may not want it as well. But if you are hiking on the cheap or the super cheap, it can be a great way to supplement the food you've sent yourself in your box, or maybe just get a little bit extra peanut butter or just random things here and there. It can definitely help your caloric intake and your bank account. On the PCT this last year, I met a guy by the name of Cheap, and he was really cool, and he was looking to do the Pacific Crest Trail on $2,000. He was doing all of these things, but one thing that definitely stands out to me is he was eating almost entirely out of hiker boxes, which was a lot of peanut butter, a lot of trail mix, and generally things that other people who are trying to live a little bit more luxuriously aren't going to be eating. But he made that sacrifice, and if I do remember, he finished the trail and probably didn't spend much more than $2,000 as his goal. So that's roughly less than $1 a mile. So he really held up to his name, Cheap. I think some people would be very surprised to hear how much money some thru hikers spend. They are all, in one way or another, practicing these types of things. Maybe all of them, maybe some of them, maybe even more of them. Personally, on my 5,000 mile Eastern Continental hike, I spent about $1 a mile for that entire thing, seeing twice as much as most people get to in the same amount of time with that same money. Twice as much stuff. So I feel like these tips are really worthwhile. I practiced and used as many of these things as I could to be able to do that. I think the biggest thing to kind of take away from this, and the biggest tip here, is to go faster if you want to spend less money. Because ultimately, if you go faster, just naturally, you're going to have to do these things, not to save money, but to just keep up that pace and those miles per day. So speed may seem kind of silly at times, but it has such an important role in doing these hikes, for me at least, and to be able to do these hikes over and over year after year.